Hey guys, my name is Francisco Hernandez, and today's video is actually part 2 of another video where I explain how I created this photo on the screen here of AJ from a recent workshop that I did over in York, Pennsylvania. I wanted to start separating my building shot videos into how I created the shot and how I edited the shot because I feel like it's very lengthy of a video when I add the two together in one video. So that's why I'm going to go over how I edited that shot that I just showed you on the screen. I want to give a huge thanks to the model AJ for modeling so great, and also the hosts of the workshop, Tim and Jen Orndorff. Before I continue, I do want to let you know that this video is sponsored by Adorama. Adorama is an industry-leading retailer that has been serving photography, videography, and audio customers for almost 50 years now. Their motto is everyone is a creator, and they do their best to unleash that creator within us all by providing us with the tools and expertise necessary to get the job done. I actually personally shop at Adorama for both the great deals on products I use and recommend, but also the great customer service on those products as well. If you find yourself interested in any product I talk about in today's video, check the links that will be in the description area below, and be sure to use those links if you decide to order. What you're seeing on the screen right now is the edited version of this shot of AJ, and this next shot is the unedited version. So I want to explain how I got from this point to this point here. One of the key differences that you can see is I did raise the exposure a little bit. I raised it at 0.5, and I also did change the color temperature. You can see in this unedited version, I'm at 5100 plus 15 tints, and then I reduced the color temperature to 4900 and also changed the tint to 20. And then again, I did raise the exposure to 0.5, but also reduced the highlights and reduced the whites and also increased the shadows. One thing that I do with my photos is whenever I felt like there's a little bit more detail in the shadows that could be more present in the photo, is I will raise the exposure a tiny bit and then reduce the highlights and the whites. And that does give me a good exposure on everything that was already decently exposed, but now it just lifts the shadows more naturally. Another thing that I did was on the very bottom is something I always do to increase the saturation is I changed the blue primary saturation slider to 80, but this always makes the blues and oranges way too saturated. So I did a little bit of sharpening, and then I reduced the saturation of the oranges. In addition to doing that, I also changed the hue of a lot of different colors so you can see exactly what colors they are on the screen right now. But one thing that was a very big difference, or not huge of a difference, but something that was a big difference to me was the blue in the background. I did change it just a little bit to be a little bit more, honestly, there's no specific reason, but I just felt like I wanted a different type of blue. So that's why I changed the sliders to get a blue that I preferred more. The biggest part of this edit is actually not in those minor adjustments, but actually in the adjustment brush. So I usually get a lot of different layers in terms of brushing different areas of the image and changing the exposure. And in this photo, I felt like I did want to very much change the exposure in different areas like shadows. And that's why I have so many different layers adjusting those different things. So I'll break down exactly what I did right now. In this first layer, I did add a little bit of brightness throughout the entirety of like her. So you can see everything that's red is actually going to be a little bit brightened by 0.5. You can see the adjustment that I made here on the side. In case you're wondering how it looks like before I added that, you can see this is the before and this is the after. I wanted her to kind of glow, so that's why I added a little bit more exposure on her and a little bit of her surrounding. With this next layer, you can see that I did target a lot of the shadow area, and that's why I did lift the shadows just so slightly at 0.5. But in this next one, I did raise it a little bit more at 40 in the shadows, so you can see the before and the after. I felt like certain areas of the tile specifically were just too dark, so that's why I raised the shadows on those. And then I raised the shadows of the entire area, or actually not raise the shadows, but lower the exposure negative 0.5 and also reduce the blacks to -5, and that gave me a darker effect. So you can see the before and after. I felt like it was too very exposed. With this next layer, I didn't actually do anything, but I was going to raise the shadows in all the area that's red on the screen right now, but I felt like you might see the areas that I lifted a little too much, so I just decided to just scrap that. So that's why I'm gonna just delete that right there because I didn't do anything on that layer. Then in the next layer, I targeted her shirt because I felt like it was too bright. So you can see before and after. It's actually very subtle, but I did reduce I believe I reduced the whites to -25. And the last thing I did in Lightroom was, I'm gonna zoom in on the face so you can see the eyes a little bit better. I did raise the brightness and saturation of the eyes just a tad bit so you can see the before and the after. And then after that, I did everything in Lightroom, but I did also want to briefly explain that in the behind the scenes, which I'll show you right here, in this behind the scenes, her arm is actually up a little bit. So you can see that she did raise her hand a little bit. So you can see that you don't see that hand here, but I did like it in the behind the scenes. So one thing I actually did was add that hand from the behind the scenes into my final shot. So you're gonna see that right now in Photoshop. On the screen here is the final edited shot of this photo of AJ, and I want to show you guys how I got to that point. So here's the after, and then here is the before. I did a lot of removal of distractions in this image, and also added that hand like I mentioned before. So that's going to be the next layer here, add remove. Before, or actually this is the before and this is the after. It had some shadows over here, the light stand in the back, those different things that, you know, that bar thing on the TV. I think I didn't do it here, but I did eventually remove this highlight on the back on the TV, and I added that hand or the arm there. The very next thing I did was change the colors. I did think the colors that were naturally present here were fine, but I felt like it could, you know, it could have been a little bit more spice in terms of the color. So I did add a few selective color adjustment layers. So that's going to be, this is the before, and then here's the after. Before and after. So I want to show you guys the differences. I added, you know, I was just playing around and then adding different like gradients and changing the blending mode and changing the color of what the gradient was. It was basically just a lot of playing around. So here's the first thing I did, the second thing I did, and then I added that gradient on the bottom, and then I added another gradient on the bottom. And then I do end up actually changing the color just a little bit at the end. So I'll just show you guys that in a little bit because I felt like this was a little too red. So eventually I removed some of those reds and a final selective color adjustment layer at the end there. But the very next thing I do here is I add a frequency separation layer, and that's just to kind of smoothen the skin a tiny bit. So it's kind of very subtle in this photo. So you can see the before and after, it's very, very subtle. Then I added a little bit of contrast so you can see that here. And to explain exactly how I added the contrast, I did add a copy of the entire photo, and then I changed it to soft light and then reduced the opacity to 10, and that kind of gave her a nice glowy effect. So I'm going to show you guys the before and the after. It's very subtle, and then I felt like when I added that effect, it kind of made the image a little dark, so I added a little bit more brightness with the curves, and I felt like it was a little too bright, but I only figured that out at the end of the edit where I actually darkened the image a little bit. That was at this point, I felt like it was fine, but you know when your eyes adjust and then you figure out, oh wait, I should correct these different things. That's what I do at the end here. I then did a layer of liquefy, so you can see that from here before and the after. Then I did a little bit of dodge and burn, so before, or actually before and after, before, after. And I also felt like the bags underneath her eyes were just a little bit prominent, so I did reduce some of that. So before and after, so you can see it right there. I also increased the brightness of her eyes just a tad bit, so before, after. It's so subtle. The very next thing I did was remove some distractions, so you can see this is the before, this is the after, and those two distractions was her hand and the highlight on the TV behind her. I actually thought the TV highlight was fine, but my wife Ashley was like, that's too distracting, you gotta remove it. And I did agree with her, but I was too lazy. But then I was like, you know what, let me try generative fill in Photoshop and see what it can do. And it gave me a nice result on the TV. So then I tried it on the hand, and it gave me a nice result on the hand too. I feel like this hand here is too much on display like this, and I wanted more of like an elegant pose, and I got really lucky in this generative fill tool in Photoshop that it gave me a nice elegant hand. So I kept that hand there, and then I decreased the brightness or made the image a little bit darker with this curves adjustment layer. And the next thing I did when I zoomed in on purpose, because you can see that there's like this, I think it's makeup that's creating this little bit of a nice shine in the eye. I felt like it was a little distracting, so I removed that. And then the last thing I did was add another selective color to just remove some of those reds that I felt like were a little too present in the image at the end of the edit. That's everything that I did to this photo to edit it. If you have any questions at all, let me know in the comments below and I'll reply as soon as possible. I want to give one last thanks to Adorama for sponsoring this video, because when they do that, it allows me to keep making free content for you guys, so definitely check them out. Take care guys, and I'll see you in the very next video.